The words hung in the air between us, sharp and final, like the crack of a whip. I want a divorce, Clara. I stared at my husband, Thomas Reed. The man I had shared a bed and a home with for 3 years. The father of the child growing inside me, a secret flutter of life I was only just beginning to acknowledge. The world seemed to slow, the familiar kitchen with its chipped enamel sink and the scent of yesterday's stew tilting on its axis. But this was not my first time on this precipice. A torrent of memories, not dreams but lived experiences, flooded my mind. A different timeline where I, Clara, had reacted with desperate, clawing horror to this same declaration. I had screamed, pleaded, and threatened my own life. I had refused to let go of a man whose heart had already left me. That refusal had set in motion a chain of events that ended with me, 8 months pregnant, broken and overworked, breathing my last in the cold mud of a labor farm, my unborn child dying with me. The reason for the divorce stood just behind Thomas, a vision of calculated vulnerability. Evelyn Ross, the widow of Thomas's younger brother, Michael. Her eyes, large and luminous, were red-rimmed, and a delicate hand rested on her own barely showing belly. "It's only temporary, Clara," Thomas said, his voice a low, persuasive baritone that had once made my heart sing. Now it sent a chill down my spine. "Evelyn has no one. Michael is gone. He's fragile. I feel responsible. I can get her housing on the base, look after her until the baby comes. Once she's back on her feet, we can annul the divorce. It will be a formality, nothing more." In my first life I had believed those lies. I had seen his concern as misguided chivalry, not the betrayal it truly was. I had fought the symptom, his desire to care for Evelyn instead of the disease, his love for her. I looked from his earnest, lying face to Evelyn's performative grief. I saw the ghost of a smirk in her eyes, a challenge. She believed she had won. And in that other life she had. Not this time. The despair that had once choked me was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. This was my chance. My escape. My revenge would not be one of screaming and clinging. It would be one of silence and release. I would give him exactly what he wanted and watch as the foundation of the life he thought he desired crumbled beneath him. I took a slow, steadying breath, letting my shoulders slump in a semblance of defeated acceptance. I saw the flicker of surprise in Thomas's eyes. He had been prepared for a fight. "All right, Thomas," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'll grant you the divorce." The shock on his face was almost comical. Evelyn's carefully constructed mask of sorrow slipped for a second, revealing pure, unadulterated triumph. You will." Thomas stammered, recovering quickly. "Clara, I thank you for understanding. I have one condition," I continued, cutting off his flow of false gratitude. "You will give me $1,000. Consider it compensation. For me and for the child." I let my hand rest on my stomach, a subtle reminder of the life he was so casually discarding. $1,000 was a significant sum, enough to start over. In my past life he had kept me penniless, controlling me through financial dependence. He hesitated only for a moment, his military mind calculating the cost against the convenience of my compliance. "Fine," he agreed a little too quickly. "It's the least I can do." "There's no time like the present," I said, echoing the words he had used before. "Let's go to the courthouse now and file the paperwork." The trip to the Civil Affairs Bureau was a blur. I moved as if in a dream, my body going through the motions while my mind plotted a new future. I signed my name on the dotted line, the scratch of the pen a sound of liberation. When the clerk handed me the final decree, a simple piece of paper that severed our legal bond, I saw Thomas exhale a sigh of profound relief. The burden of me, of his legitimate wife and child, was lifted. The weight off his shoulders made him generous. "Don't worry, Clara," he said, his tone softer than it had been in months. "This is just for show. Once Evelyn is settled and can manage on her own, I'll make this right. We'll be a family again." A cold, mocking smile threatened to break through my composed exterior. I remembered his cruelty in that other life. The coldness in his eyes when he had me framed for adultery, the satisfaction when my reputation was destroyed. A tiger may not eat its own cubs, but Thomas Reed had been willing to destroy his own child for the woman he truly loved. I would not believe a single word that fell from his lips. I ignored him, clutching the divorce certificate as if it were a winning lottery ticket, and strode down the stone steps of the building. My indifference unsettled him. He hurried after me, his voice dropping to a concerned whisper. Clara, from now on I won't be here to look after you. You have to take care of yourself. And the baby. If you need anything at all, you send for me. It was a hollow offer, a salve for his own conscience. But before I could form a reply, a sound interrupted us. A soft, pained whimper. Plus, my stomach, Evelyn moaned, clutching her abdomen and crouching down dramatically. It hurt so much. The transformation in Thomas was instantaneous. All thought of me vanished. Worry etched itself onto his face as he rushed to her side, sweeping her into his arms as if she were made of glass. It's all right, Evie, I've got you, he murmured, his voice thick with a tenderness he had never shown me even in our best days. As he carried her toward the waiting jeep, Evelyn, secure in his arms, turned her head over his shoulder. Her eyes met mine and she offered me a slow, deliberate, provocative smile. The message was clear and cruel. See? In his heart I will always be more important than you. I simply watched, my expression neutral. Let him carry his precious burden. Let him believe her every performance. Their shared delusion was the weapon I would use to destroy them. The 2-hour walk back to the house we had shared gave me time to think, to remember. In my last life I had been blind, but death had gifted me with 20/20 vision. I saw now what I had refused to see then. Evelyn was beautiful, vivacious, and knew how to wield her charm like a weapon. Even before her husband Michael's death, there had been whispers. I had caught her more than once, sneaking men into her home when Michael was away on business. I had tried to warn Thomas. I told him the child she carried might not be Michael's, that it could belong to any number of her admirers, including a local troublemaker named Leo Grant. He had been furious, accusing me of slandering a grieving widow, of having a vile and jealous mind. Later, when his betrayal was complete, I learned the ugliest truth of all. Among Evelyn's many lovers was Thomas himself. The man I called husband had already been sharing her bed. He was likely the father of the child in her belly, which was why he was so desperate to give it his name and a secure future. My existence was the only obstacle. In this life I would not be that obstacle. I would step aside and let the two shameless people have each other. I would be a spectator to the spectacular collapse of their house of cards. As I approached my small house, a movement near my door caught my eye. A man was lurking, peering into my windows with a furtive, predatory air. My blood ran cold, then hot with a fresh wave of hatred. It was Leo Grant. The thug Thomas had used to frame me in my previous life. What was he doing here now? The pieces clicked into place. In my past life, I had long suspected Leo was one of Evelyn's men. I wondered if he too believed the child was his. He was handsome in a rough way but lazy and penniless. He and Evelyn must have concocted a plan to let Thomas, the respectable soldier, be the fool who raised another man's child. A plan began to form in my mind, cold and sharp as a diamond. If I could turn Leo's devotion into doubt, his love into rage, he would become a weapon far more dangerous than any I could wield myself. As I drew closer, Leo hurried up to me, a fake, greasy smile plastered on his face. "Clara, where have you been?" he asked with false cheer. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "What do you think? Getting a divorce?" When his eyes landed on the certificate in my hand, joy flashed within them, quickly masked. "You actually divorced Thomas?" "That's right," I said, my voice dripping with scorn. "He wants to play house with Evelyn and her baby, so he forced me into this. He thinks I'm a fool, but I know exactly what's in his heart." Leo's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "What do I mean?" I sneered. "Thomas and that cheap woman Evelyn are already a pair. And she hasn't just been with him. There's young Peter from the power plant, old Mr. Walsh from the boiler factory, and that Lou fellow from the machine shop." I counted them off on my fingers, watching his face pale with each name. "That woman has some talent, doesn't she? 7 or 8 men on a string. Who knows which poor fool the child in her belly actually belongs to?" The delight that had been on Leo's face moments before evaporated, replaced by a sickly, ashen pallor. He had believed he was her only secret. He had believed the baby was his. The realization that he was just one of many, that Thomas was not a dupe but a rival who had won, was a physical blow. His fists clenched and his jaw tightened. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stalked away, his body rigid with fury. A small, cold smile touched my lips. The first stone had been cast. Let the dogs start their fight. I entered my quiet, empty house. It was time to plan. The child in my womb, a pang of genuine sorrow, sharp and deep, pierced my cold resolve. But I hardened my heart. This child was a product of a love that had been a lie, a tie to a man who was a monster. In my previous life, Thomas had ensured its death. In this one, I would not give him the chance. I would not bring a child into my battle, a battle for survival. I had to end the pregnancy. It was the only way to be truly free. As I began to sew my meager savings into the lining of my coat, I heard the Jeep pull up outside. Thomas was back with Evelyn. The final act of my old life was about to begin. The front door creaked open and I heard Evelyn's voice, a breathy, fragile thing. "Thomas, I'm so tired. I don't think I can take another step." I stepped out of my room to see her leaning against him, her body molded to his side as if she had no bones of her own. When her eyes met mine, they gleamed with victory before fluttering shut in a show of exhaustion. "My legs feel like water," she whimpered. Thomas, who had always valued propriety in public, no longer bothered with pretense in what he now considered his liberated domain. "I've got you, Evie," he said softly, and in one smooth motion he scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He carried her past me without a word into the bedroom that had once been ours. The door clicked shut and soon, I heard the low murmur of his voice and her soft, tinkling laughter, a sound that was both intimate and mocking. It went on for what felt like an eternity before Thomas finally emerged, his hair slightly disheveled, a satisfied flush on his cheeks. He looked at me, his expression one of pure, unvarnished entitlement. "Evelyn is anemic," he announced as if diagnosing a queen. "The stress of the day has worn her out. She needs something nourishing. Go to the market, buy a good chicken and make her some soup." The audacity of it, even now, sent a fresh jolt of anger through me. Throughout our marriage I had never seen a cent of his army salary. Every penny went to his mother Helen, or to subsidize Michael and Evelyn's household. I had paid for our food, our clothes, everything from my own meager earnings as a seamstress. I had believed it was his way of being filial, of helping his struggling brother. Now I saw the truth. There was no nobility in it. His heart and his money had always been with them. I was just the convenient fool, the free servant. In my past life this realization had come to me on my deathbed. In this one it fueled my resolve. I looked up at him, my face a mask of calm indifference. "Fine," I said. "Give me the money and I'll buy a chicken for Evelyn." My request stopped him short. He was so used to me funding his family's needs that my demand for reimbursement seemed to baffle him. His face darkened. "Can't you cover it for now? I don't have any cash on me." "My money is all spent," I replied flatly. It was mostly true. What little I had was now hidden in the seams of my clothes. "You've been married to me for 3 years and never gave me a single penny. Your mother came by every other week for medicine money. I can't conjure coins from the air." I could see the irritation warring with his desire for a quiet life. He wanted me to be the compliant, self-sacrificing Clara of old. I pressed my advantage. "And while we're on the subject of money, you promised me $1,000 after the divorce. For me and the baby. I want it now." His face tightened into a scowl. "I don't have that much right now. I'll get it to you. You want to go back on your word?" I let a sneer enter my voice. "Thomas, you're taking care of Evelyn. I've stepped aside for you. But you can't live without a conscience. The child I'm carrying is your own flesh and blood. You will give me that money. No. Or else." He knew exactly what my "or else" meant. The threat of exposure hung in the air between us. An affair, especially with his brother's widow, could ruin his military career, strip him of the rank and privilege he held so dear. His comfortable life depended on my silence. Reluctance was etched into every line of his body, but finally, with a sound of disgust, he pulled a thick envelope from his inner jacket pocket and shoved it into my hand. "There. 500 now. The rest later. Now go get that chicken." He stormed out, heading for the market himself, his pride clearly wounded. The moment he was gone, Evelyn emerged from the bedroom. The picture of frail weakness had vanished, replaced by a spitting fury. She stalked towards me, her eyes blazing. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you take his money?" I gave her a cold, thin smile. "This isn't his money. It's hush money. payment for my silence about the filthy affair between the two of you. She hadn't expected me to be so blunt. She froze for a second, then let out a careless, ugly laugh. So, fine. I won't bother hiding it anymore. A proud, possessive gleam entered her eyes. He loves me. It's always been me. Don't be shocked, dear Clara. On my wedding night to Michael, it was Thomas who shared my bed. A wave of nausea washed over me. They were even more disgusting than I had imagined. Seeing my revulsion only pleased her more. She leaned closer, her voice a venomous whisper. Michael was drunk, passed out cold. I wasn't about to waste my wedding night. His mother, Helen, sent Thomas in to check on him. And right there beside his snoring brother, Thomas held me. He's been mine ever since. No wonder he was so desperate to protect her. No wonder he was willing to destroy me. He wasn't just her lover, he was likely the father of her child. He believed he was her one and only. I clung to that thought. Let him believe it. Let him die clinging to that lie. Evelyn's gaze then dropped to my stomach and her expression hardened. Since you know everything, you should stop dreaming. Get rid of that thing you're carrying. Why should I? I answered, feigning a stubborn hope I did not feel. Thomas promised he would remarry me. This child is my guarantee. You still dare to dream of giving birth? She sneered. Let me make it clear. Thomas told me himself. He will never let your child be born. Within 3 days he'll make sure the baby in your belly is gone without a trace. Her words were like shards of ice piercing my heart. But I believed them. In my previous life he had shown no mercy. This was not an empty threat. It was a promise. If he intended to kill my child again, I would not hold back. The debt of 2 lives would be settled at once. When Thomas returned, he was not alone. He had brought his mother, Helen Reed. While he went to the kitchen to deal with the chicken, Helen marched straight into my room. Her sharp, triangular eyes scanned me with contempt. I'm sick, she announced without preamble. I need to go to the specialist hospital in the province. I need $500. Give it to me now. From the day I married her son, Helen had never shown me a kind word. He found me plain, dull, and unworthy. No matter how much money I gave her or how many gifts I bought, it was never enough. She despised my quiet nature, but she adored Evelyn, who knew just how to flatter and cajole. Evelyn, who had never given her a cent, was the daughter she'd always wanted. He still thought I was the same doormat. I looked at her, my expression icy. If you want money, ask your son Thomas. Or better yet, ask your precious daughter-in-law, Evelyn. Why are you asking me, an outsider? I'm divorced from your son. I have no obligation to give you a single cent. Helen was stunned into silence for a moment, then her face purpled with rage. You ungrateful wretch, she shrieked. How dare you talk back to me? Who do you think you are, demanding money from Thomas? Have you looked in a mirror? Do you even deserve it? Whether I deserve it or not isn't for you to decide, I shot back. It was your son and that cheap woman, Evelyn, who couldn't wait to be together. They gave me this money to buy my silence. You filthy liar. How dare you slander my boy, she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. Do you believe I won't slap you dead right here? I stood up sharply, my own anger finally breaking through the cold facade. Let me warn you, old woman. Watch your mouth. If you push me, I'll shout it from the rooftop. I'll make sure every neighbor, every ant on the ground, knows about Thomas and Evelyn's scandal. They'll have something to gossip about for years. Her face went from purple to a mottled gray. She knew the truth of my threat. She glared at me, her body trembling with fury, before finally turning and stomping away, defeated for now. Thomas had brought his mother back with one goal: to reclaim the money he'd given me. When that failed, the 3 of them retreated into the bedroom to conspire. Soon enough, Helen emerged, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The soup must be ready. Come, stoke the fire and serve it. As they huddled in the bedroom, I slipped quietly to the back of the house and crouched beneath their window. The wood was thin and their voices carried clearly. She already knows, Helen's shrill voice was saying. She's using it to extort money from you. She won't let us live in peace. We have to settle this, and quickly. She's right, Evelyn chimed in. I'm worried she'll keep making trouble. We should deal with her once and for all. Then Thomas's voice, low and cold as a steel blade. I was going to keep her around if she stayed obedient and quiet. But now that she knows too much and has a spine, we act tonight. Do you have a plan? Helen asked, her voice eager. Yes, Thomas replied. To prevent her from exposing us, we strike first. We'll find her a fake lover and frame her. The drug is already prepared. There was the same vicious plan from my past life. A cold smile curled my lips as I slipped back into the kitchen. The air was thick with the savory scent of chicken soup. I lifted the lid of the pot, and with a steady hand, I picked out the 2 plump thighs, the wings, and the choicest piece of breast meat. I piled them into a large bowl and sat at the kitchen table, eating until I was full and satisfied, the rich broth slick on my lips. I devoured the meat and drank 2 full bowls of soup. Let them have the bones. When they finally emerged, Helen swept into the kitchen with a saccharine smile. Is the soup ready? Let's eat. Her eyes fell on the pile of clean-picked bones on the table. Her smile vanished. She rushed to the pot and yanked off the lid, finding nothing but a carcass and broth. Her face turned a mottled crimson. You greedy little bitch, she screamed. There are other people in this house. You don't know how to share. She lunged at me, her hand raised to strike. I was ready. As she came at me, I sidestepped neatly and kicked a wooden stool into her path. She stumbled over it with a cry, her momentum carrying her forward. Her face smashed into the sharp edge of the table with a sickening crunch. A piercing scream tore from her throat as she clutched her mouth. 2 front teeth skittered across the floor, followed by a spray of blood. She howled, spitting blood and curses. Thomas! Beat this little whore to death. Kill her now. Thomas stood frozen, not out of mercy but because of their plan for later. His fists were clenched, his eyes burning with hatred. Clara, he snarled, you've gone too far. If anything happens to my mother, don't blame me for what I do to you. He grabbed the wailing, bloodied Helen and stormed out, with Evelyn hurrying behind them, shooting me a look of pure venom. They were laying the groundwork, painting me as a violent, unstable woman. So that later when they framed me no one would question my guilt. They had no kindness in their hearts and I owed them no loyalty. Tonight the trap they had set for me would snap shut on them. I had a plan of my own. And it was already in motion. At 7 o'clock that evening, Thomas, Helen, and Evelyn finally returned. The air was thick with their unspoken fury. I sat quietly in my room waiting, my senses sharpened to a razor's edge. Every creak of the floorboard, every whisper from their room, was a note in the symphony of their downfall. Half an hour later the moment arrived. Thomas pushed my door open. In his hands was a bowl of steaming brown sugar and eggs. A rare, conciliatory smile plastered on his face. You must be hungry, he said, his voice dripping with a false gentleness that made my skin crawl. I made this for you, Clara. I know the divorce has wronged you. There's really nothing between me and Evelyn. I was only taking care of her for Michael's sake. Don't listen to what others say. And my mom, she's always had that temper. Don't hold it against her. If I were the Clara of my last life, these words would have melted my resolve, filling me with a foolish, hopeful warmth. But I was a creature forged in the cold fire of betrayal. I looked at him, my gaze flat and unwavering. The affair between you and Evelyn wasn't gossip, I stated calmly. She told me herself. She said that on her wedding night with Michael, you were with her in the same room. Thomas hadn't expected this. The smile on his face stiffened, a crack in his carefully constructed facade. He recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. She was talking nonsense. Don't believe her. I'm not that kind of man. Why would she lie about something like that? I pressed, watching him squirm. Who would be foolish enough to throw dirt on themselves? She even said the child in her belly is yours. That's impossible, he blurted out, a little too quickly, a little too loud. He was afraid of what other truths I might utter. To shut me up, he thrust the bowl toward me, the forced gentleness returning to his tone. Claire, eat this first. Afterward, I'll call Evelyn here and let her explain it to you face to face. He needed to see me swallow the drugged concoction. He needed the reassurance of my impending helplessness. So I gave it to him. I took the bowl and, under his watchful eye, I brought it to my lips and drank every last drop, the overly sweet liquid coating my throat. I saw the tension leave his shoulders in a visible wave of relief. He took the empty bowl from my hands, his smile now genuine with triumph. Lie down and rest for a while, he said, his voice oozing fake kindness. I obediently slipped off my shoes and lay on the bed. At the doorway, I caught the fleeting cold smirk on his lips before he shut the door, plunging the room into semi-darkness. The moment the latch clicked, I moved. I swung my legs off the bed and quietly made myself a nest of pillows under the quilt, shaping it to look like a sleeping form. Then I slipped into the darkest corner of the room, a brick I had gathered earlier held tight in my hand, my heart hammering a steady, determined rhythm against my ribs. Half an hour later, right on schedule, the door creaked open. A shadowy figure slipped inside, moving with a thief's caution. Leo Grant. He paused, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light, his gaze fixing on the lump in the bed. A greedy, anticipatory grin spread across his face. This was his moment, his reward for helping them ruin me. He never saw me coming. As he took a step toward the bed, I rose from the shadows and swung the brick with all my strength. It connected with the back of his head with a dull, sickening thud. He grunted, his body going rigid for a second before he crumpled to the floor like a sack of stones, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Hatred, white-hot and pure, surged through me. This was the man who had leered at me in my previous life, who had been a willing participant in my destruction. I stood over him, the brick heavy in my hand. Revenge for a life lost demanded more than just a knock on the head. I raised the brick again and brought it down with brutal, precise force onto his groin. A wet, crushing sound echoed in the silent room. He would never harm another woman again. A few minutes later, I heard the familiar shuffling footsteps of Helen outside my door. She was eavesdropping just as I knew she would be. I crept to the bed and began to rhythmically shake the wooden frame, making it creak and groan under the weight of the pillows. I heard her sharp, satisfied intake of breath, then her footsteps hurrying away, no doubt to gather her crowd of witnesses. The moment she was gone, I sprang into action. I dragged Leo's unconscious, heavy body across the floor, out the back door, and dumped him unceremoniously behind the foul-smelling latrine. He was their problem now. Then I rushed toward Evelyn's room. The door was slightly ajar. Peering inside, I saw the scene I had orchestrated unfolding in all its sordid glory. Thomas and Evelyn were locked together, lost in a drugged, shameless frenzy. The milk powder I had laced with their own sleeping draught had worked perfectly. Perhaps heaven itself couldn't stand their vileness, for when I burst into the room, brandishing a heavy rolling pin, Evelyn, startled, let out a sharp cry and clamped down on Thomas in a vice-like grip, locking them together in a painful, inextricable embrace. They screamed in unison, a mixture of passion, pain, and sheer panic. I didn't hesitate. I raised the rolling pin and brought it down on Thomas's back, my blows fueled by the rage of 2 lifetimes. "You heartless bastard!" I shrieked, my voice tearing through the night. "You said you had errands to run. And here you are in Evelyn's room. Do you have any conscience left? Can you face your brother Michael in his grave?" I turned my fury on Evelyn, who was writhing and shrieking beneath Thomas. "And you disgusting woman. I treated you with kindness. After Michael died, I checked on you, brought you food, gave you money. This is how you repay me? By crawling into bed with my husband? Doesn't your conscience ache?" I screamed for the whole world to hear. "Look. Everyone, look with your own eyes. Thomas Reed and Evelyn Ross are nothing but filthy, heartless people. This isn't even their first time." The onlookers Helen had so diligently gathered now crowded the doorway, their faces a mixture of shock, disgust, and morbid fascination. The angry whispers began, swelling into a chorus of condemnation. "This is outrageous. His wife is still pregnant. To do this with his brother's widow, it's disgusting. They're stuck. My God, they're actually stuck together." The scene was one of unparalleled disgrace. Thomas and Evelyn, trapped in their shame, screamed in agony as I continued to beat Thomas's back and shoulders, my tears of performance and genuine fury mingling on my face. I played the part of the wronged wife to perfection, listing his sins, his lies about taking care of his sister-in-law, his plan to take her into the army, his forced divorce. The crowd ate it up. Their sympathy was a palpable force, a shield around me. Then Helen, seeing her son being beaten bloody, finally broke from her stupor and rushed forward, shrieking, "Enough. Stop it right now." But I was a force of nature. This was the hatred of 2 lifetimes burning through me. I swung the rolling pin with relentless strength. In a desperate attempt to protect her son, Helen shoved me hard. I let out a piercing cry, allowing the momentum to send me sprawling to the ground. I clutched my belly, my face contorted in feigned agony. "Pie child. Pie baby." I wailed, the performance complete. Panic erupted. The neighbors, now fully on my side, surged forward. Gentle hands lifted me. Quick, to the hospital. The last thing I saw as I was carried away was the scene of perfect chaos. Thomas and Evelyn still locked together, writhing on the bed, Helen screaming incoherently, and the sea of disgusted faces of our neighbors. My revenge was in motion. And of course the baby couldn't be saved. I had made sure of that hours ago with the abortion pills. From the moment I was reborn, I had never intended to keep a child born of such a man. It was a sacrifice for my freedom, a necessary loss to sever the last tie and to cement my status as the ultimate victim. The play was over. The consequences were just beginning. The hospital was a blur of white walls, hushed voices, and the sharp scent of antiseptic. I was wheeled into surgery, my performance of a woman losing her child earning me hushed, sympathetic tones from the nurses. The procedure was quick. My body was merely finishing what I had already started. When I awoke in the recovery ward, weak and empty, a profound sense of finality settled over me. The last physical remnant of my life with Thomas was gone. I was free. The gossip, however, was just taking flight. It swept through the hospital corridors like a wildfire, fanned by the nurses and orderlies who had witnessed the unbelievable scene of Thomas and Evelyn's admission. Did you hear? Naked, tangled together. Couldn't be separated. And it's the older brother and the younger brother's widow. The scandal. That officer, always so high and mighty, a lecher in uniform. They say the child in her belly is his all along. That Evelyn Ross, she's been with half the town. Who knows who the father really is? Affairs lead to tragedy. You don't think Michael's death was convenient, do you? And the mother, Helen Reed? He knew. She was in on it. She tried to frame her own pregnant daughter-in-law. I lay in my bed, listening to the whispers, a cold, satisfied smile playing on my lips. The court of public opinion had convened, and the verdict was damning. I didn't rest. As soon as I had the strength, I asked to use the hospital's telephone. I placed a call to Thomas's military unit. My voice was weak but clear as I reported him for conduct unbecoming of an officer, for adultery, and for immoral behavior that brought disgrace upon the uniform. The duty officer on the other end of the line was stern and professional, promising an immediate investigation. Only then did I allow myself to truly rest. I knew that after the public spectacle of the previous night, no amount of influence or sweet-talking could save Thomas's career. Later that day my neighbor Mrs. Archer came to visit, her face alight with the thrill of bearing shocking news. "Clara, you'll never believe it," she whispered, pulling her chair close to my bedside. "Thomas was beaten again right here in the hospital." I feigned a flutter of surprise, widening my eyes. Who would do that? Who else? The Grant family. Leo's people came for him. They attacked him in his room, broke 3 of his ribs and burst 1 of his eyes. I let out a gasp, burying my face in my hands to hide my lack of shock. But why? Why would they do that? Mrs. Archer sighed, patting my hand. "You poor naive girl. Heaven was watching over you." She leaned in even closer, her voice dropping. "Leo's family said Evelyn went to see him last night. She must have lured him out. They found him unconscious behind your latrine this morning. They saved his life, but he's crippled. Permanently." He studied my face. When he woke up in so much agony, he confessed everything. Told them all about his affair with Evelyn. That shameless woman wasn't just with Thomas. She'd been stringing Leo along for ages. He thought the baby was his, so he did whatever she asked. Last night she told him to sneak into your room to teach you a lesson. But as soon as he crept in, someone knocked him out. Her eyes flickered with curiosity. "Clara, was it you who hit Leo?" "Of course not," I said smoothly, my lie well rehearsed. "After I ate those sugared eggs Thomas brought me, my stomach was so upset. I was running to the bathroom all night. You know how it is with pregnant women." I let a tear slip down my cheek for good measure. Mrs. Archer nodded vigorously, her suspicion replaced by maternal sympathy. "That's true, dear. When I was carrying my son, I was up and down all night long." I continued, weaving my truth into their narrative. "When I was coming back from the bathroom, I passed Evelyn's room and heard strange sounds. Her husband is dead. So who could she be with? I stopped to listen and I heard Thomas's voice. I just saw red. I grabbed the first thing I could find and ran in to confront them. Mrs. Archer clucked her tongue, her face a picture of righteous belief. So that's how it was. Lucky for you, it seems Leo was lured there by Evelyn herself, planning to set you up. The one who knocked Leo out had to be Thomas. How could a pregnant woman like you have that much strength? It was perfect. Mrs. Archer, a respected busybody, would now be the chief evangelist of my version of the truth. The Grant family, hearing Leo's confession, was utterly convinced that Thomas and Evelyn had conspired to cripple their son. Their retaliation was swift and brutal. I learned later that Evelyn didn't escape their wrath either. When she tried to flee during the attack on Thomas, the Grants blocked her path. They saw her as the root of the evil and showed her no mercy. After a savage beating, she hemorrhaged so badly she lost the baby. The doctors had to perform a hysterectomy. She would never bear children again. The news was a balm to my soul. That woman, who had coveted everything I had, was now left with nothing. No child, no future, and no way to ensnare another man with the promise of a family. The Army's investigation team arrived with brisk efficiency. The scandal was already the talk of the county, and they had no trouble gathering evidence and witness statements. For behavior as egregious as Thomas's, there was no leniency. He was dishonorably discharged on the spot, stripped of his rank, his pension, and his future. Mrs. Archer later told me that when he regained consciousness and learned his fate, he let out an animal-like howl and passed out again. 3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. I returned to my house, my body weary but my spirit lighter than it had been in 2 lifetimes. As I pushed the door open, I found Helen Reed in my kitchen, attempting to cook a meager meal. In just 3 days she had aged a decade. Her face was a mosaic of yellowing bruises, a gift from the Grant family. Her 2 missing front teeth gave her a hollow, witch-like appearance. When she saw me, she staggered to her feet, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger. You black-heart little viper. How dare you come back? I'll show you what happens now." All her frustration and humiliation boiled over, and she lunged at me, thinking she could reclaim some shred of power by beating the woman she still saw as her inferior. But I was no longer that woman. I sidestepped her lunge, grabbed a handful of her greasy hair, and slapped her across the face with a crack that echoed in the small kitchen. Once, twice, 3 times until my palm stung. I then dragged her, shrieking and flailing, by her hair and threw her bodily out the front door into the dirt. "This is my house," I said, my voice low and deadly calm. "If you dare set foot inside again, I will beat you every single time." Her face swollen, blood streaming from her nose and mouth, Helen shrieked that she would call the police. And she did. When they arrived, I calmly presented my divorce certificate and the deed to the house, which had been left to me by my parents and had never been in Thomas's name. By now the police were well aware of the scandal. They saw me as the victim, a woman betrayed, beaten, and miscarried. They had no sympathy for Helen. They scolded her harshly for trespassing and ordered her to leave immediately and never return. She slunk away, utterly humiliated, the last of her pride in tatters. I spent the rest of the day gathering every last remnant of Thomas, Evelyn, and Helen. Their clothes, their trinkets, their very presence. I made a pile of it all in the backyard and set it on fire, watching the flames lick and consume the physical evidence of my past life. The smoke carried the ashes of my old self away on the wind. My revenge was complete. I was not a fool. A cornered dog will leap over a wall. Men like Thomas and Leo were vile, and I had taken everything from them. I would not wait around for their retaliation. The decision was clear. I had to disappear. I went to the local administrative office and put my house and my transferable job up for sale. I priced the house at a low $4,000 and the job at just $1,200. The prices, a steal for the desperate, ensured a quick sale. Within a week I had the money in hand, a thick stack of cash that represented my freedom. The very day the transaction was complete, I bought a one-way train ticket south. I was leaving this town of ghosts and memories behind. I was heading to the south, where I heard the winds of reform and opening were sweeping across the land, a place where a woman with a little money and a lot of determination could carve out a new life, far from the shadows of Thomas Reed and his ruined world. The train south was a world unto itself, a rattling metal serpent spewing coal smoke as it carved through fields, then hills, and finally, a landscape that began to change. The air itself grew different, thicker, warmer, heavy with the scent of damp earth and unfamiliar blossoms. I spent the journey pressed against the window, watching the north and my past recede into a blur. The money, a significant portion of my net worth, was sewn into the lining of my coat and tucked into a money belt strapped against my skin. The rest of my life was in a single worn suitcase. I got off at a bustling terminal in a city called Guangzhou. The noise was the first thing that struck me. A cacophony of honking horns, shouted conversations in a melodic dialect I barely understood, and the constant hum of 1,000 simultaneous lives. It was overwhelming and utterly exhilarating. This was a place where no one knew me as Clara, the betrayed wife of Thomas Reed. Here I could be anyone. I found a cheap, clean boarding house run by a no-nonsense elderly woman who asked no questions. For the first few days I simply walked. I explored the markets, a riot of color and smell, with stalls overflowing with tropical fruits, live fish swimming in murky tanks, and bolts of vibrant fabric. I saw women not much older than me running their own stalls, haggling with customers, their voices sharp and confident. I saw energy here, a pulse of ambition and opportunity that had been utterly absent in my old life. This was where the future was being built, and I intended to have a piece of it. My plan was simple: clothing. It was the one skill I had honed over years of making my own clothes and mending Thomas's uniforms. I started small, using a fraction of my capital. I went to the wholesale markets at dawn when the prices were best, and bought a selection of blouses, skirts, and trousers that were a world away from the drab, practical styles of the North. They were brighter, cut differently, infused with a hint of foreign flair from nearby Hong Kong. I rented a tiny patch of pavement for a few dollars a day, laid out a blanket, and arranged my wares. The first day I sold nothing. The second, one blouse. But I watched, I learned, I listened to the successful vendors. I started to call out prices to compliment passers-by. My plain northern accent marked me as an outsider, but I used it, spinning a story of coming south for opportunity, of being a young widow trying to make her way. People were curious, then sympathetic, then finally customers. Within a month, my blanket had become a collapsible wooden stall. Within 3 months, I had saved enough to rent a small, narrow shop in a decently trafficked alley. I painted the front a cheerful yellow and called it New Dawn Apparel. It was a cliché, but it felt true. The work was relentless. I was the owner, the buyer, the salesperson, and the bookkeeper. My back ached from unpacking boxes, my voice grew hoarse from haggling. But for the first time since my rebirth, I felt a flicker of something other than cold satisfaction or grim determination. I felt pride. The money I made was mine, earned by my own wit and sweat. No one could take it from me. I kept to myself, polite but distant with the other shopkeepers. I built a life of quiet routine, opening the shop at 7, closing at 9, eating a simple meal from the noodle shop next door, and falling into a dreamless, exhausted sleep in the small room I rented above my store. I was building a fortress of self-reliance, brick by brick. It was on one of these long evenings, as I was closing the metal shutters, that I heard a familiar voice call my name, tinged with disbelief. Clara? Clara Reed. I froze, my key in the lock. Fully I turned. Standing there, looking plumper and slightly weathered, but with the same kind eyes, was Mrs. Archer. My old neighbor. The one who had spread my version of the truth like gospel. For a moment, panic seized me. A thread from my past had found me, threatening to unravel my new life. But I looked at her face, not accusatory but overjoyed and full of wonder, and the panic subsided. She was not a threat, she was a connection. Mrs. Archer, I said, a genuine smile breaking through my surprise. What are you doing here? She hurried over, grabbing my hands. It really is you. Look at you. You've made it big. This is your shop? And you look so young and beautiful. The Clara she had known had been pale, worn down by worry and neglect. The woman I was now was still thin, but my skin had gained color from the southern sun, and my eyes, once shadowed with despair, now held a clear, direct light. I had even started wearing clothes from my own stock, a well-cut navy blue dress that hinted at a shape I'd long forgotten I had. I took her to a nearby restaurant, a noisy, lively place with steam rising from dozens of tables. Over plates of steaming dumplings and stir-fried greens, she told me her story. The factory where she'd worked had shut down. With no prospects, she and her husband had sold what they could and come south to find work. He had found labor on a construction site, but she was struggling. "I've been taking odd jobs cleaning anything I can find," she said, her earlier exuberance fading into a weary sigh. An idea swift and clear formed in my mind. Mrs. Archer was a gossip, but she was also kind, hardworking, and honest. And she believed in me. My shop was growing. I needed help. I needed someone I could trust, even if that trust was rooted in a shared, fabricated past. "My shop is doing well," I said carefully. "I need another pair of hands. Someone to help with sales, to mind the shop when I'm buying stock. The pay would be fair." Her face lit up as if I'd offered her a fortune. "Oh, Clara. Really? You'd hire me? I'd work hard for you, I promise." And so Mrs. Archer, now Lena in my mind to signify her new role, became my first employee. She was a natural saleswoman, her friendly, chatty nature a perfect complement to my more reserved demeanor. With her help, New Dawn Apparel flourished. We expanded, buying more stock, attracting a loyal clientele of young office workers and factory girls who wanted a touch of style. It was during a quiet afternoon as we were sorting through a new shipment of silk scarves that Lena finally broached the subject I had been both dreading and anticipating. "You know," she began, her voice dropping conspiratorially, "after you left things, well, they got worse for Thomas." I kept my eyes on the delicate floral pattern of a scarf. Oh. She needed no more encouragement. The story spilled out, the final grim chapters of the tragedy I had set in motion. About half a month after I'd vanished, Thomas had been kicked out of the hospital, his funds exhausted. Shamelessly, he had tried to move back into my house, only to find it occupied by a new family. The realization that I was gone, that I had cut the last tie and taken the money from the sale, had been a final crushing blow. Expelled from the army, half-blind and with no prospects, he had slunk back to his rural hometown with Helen. The humiliation, it ate him alive, Lena said, shaking her head. He wasn't a soldier anymore, just a crippled farmer. He became bitter, violent. Took it all out on his mother, they say. Screaming at her, sometimes even beating her. I felt no pity. I pictured Helen, her sharp eyes dulled by fear, reaping the harvest of the monster she had helped create. "He pinned all his hopes on Evelyn, you see," Lena continued, her voice hushed. "He told himself that since he'd given up everything for her, his career, his reputation, she owed him her loyalty. He went to her, wanted her to go with him to the countryside. I could imagine the scene. Thomas, broken and desperate, seeing Evelyn as his last refuge. But she," Lena leaned in, her eyes wide. "Oh, Claire, you should have seen it. In the past, she'd lowered herself for him because of his uniform. Now he was a half-blind cripple with nothing. She didn't even hide her disgust. She told him he made her sick to look at. And then she told him the child she'd lost wasn't his brother Michael's at all. It was Leo Grant's." I set the scarf down. Even though I had suspected it, hearing the confirmation was a visceral shock. The final, cruelest twist of the knife. "Thomas, he just snapped," Lena whispered. "He beat her right there in the street, dragged her, demanded she come with him. And in the middle of it all, the Grant family showed up. With Leo crippled, they demanded Evelyn take responsibility for him for life. And faced with a choice between a half-blind, jobless Thomas and a rich, but injured Leo, she chose Leo. Without a moment's hesitation. The poetic justice of it was so perfect it was chilling. Evelyn, who had always chosen the most comfortable path, had chosen a life of nursing a broken man for his family's money, over a life of poverty with the man who had loved her enough to destroy his own life. Abandoned by her and beaten by the Grants, Thomas went back to the countryside with Helen, burning with rage. Lena took a sip of her tea, her story nearing its end. We all thought that was the end of it. But half a month later, Thomas crept back. He went to Leo's house with a butcher's knife. She paused, letting the horror of it sink in. "He slaughtered them, Clara. Both of them. Leo and Evelyn. Right there." They said the blood ran out from under the door into the yard. I sat in silence, the colorful scarves before me seeming to mock the darkness of the tale. "He didn't even try to run. He turned himself in. The trial was quick. He was sentenced to death. 6 months later, it was carried out. A firing squad. The room felt very still. Thomas, Evelyn, Leo. All gone. The players in my personal hell had annihilated each other. The final bloody full stop at the end of that chapter of my life. Lena looked at me, her expression full of a strange mix of pity and relief. It's a terrible thing, but it's over, Clara. They can't hurt you anymore. I nodded slowly, absorbing the finality of it. A cruel, immoral man like Thomas was capable of anything. I had always known a cornered dog would leap the wall. I had already died at his hands once. My flight south had been the one move that ensured I was far from that wall when he finally made his leap. Now they were all dead. Completely, utterly gone. I took a deep, slow breath, the air of my new life filling my lungs. The rotten people were out of my life. The debt was paid. The score was settled. I looked around my thriving little shop, at the loyal employee who was a link to a past I had overcome, at the vibrant city buzzing beyond my door. At last I could breathe freely. I would make sure to live happier than in my last life. This time I was certain I would find the happiness that was truly mine. It was no longer about revenge or survival. It was about living. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, that felt like a promise I could keep. The knowledge of Thomas's and Evelyn's gruesome end settled inside me not as a weight, but as an absolution. The ghosts that had haunted the periphery of my new life were finally, truly laid to rest. With that closure, a new energy infused my work. New Dawn Apparel was no longer just a refuge. It was the foundation of my future. With Lena's dependable help, I was able to take more risks. I started traveling to the ports, to Shenzhen and Zhuhai, where the first tremors of China's economic transformation were most keenly felt. Here I found factories producing for export, and sometimes I could buy overflow or slightly irregular items, denim jeans, leather jackets, polyester blouses with labels I couldn't read, for a fraction of their intended cost. These pieces were unlike anything available in the local markets, and they sold as fast as I could put them on the racks. The profits grew. I moved out of the room above the shop and rented a small, clean apartment with a window that looked out over a banyan tree. It was the first home that was entirely, unquestionably mine. I bought a Real bed, a sofa, and a small television. The simplicity of it felt like profound luxury. One rainy afternoon, a young woman no older than 20 came into the shop. She was drenched, her cheap shoes soaked through, but she moved with a fierce, hungry intensity as she examined a leather jacket, her fingers tracing the seams with a professional appreciation. "This is good stitching," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "Thank you," I said. "It's from a factory in Shenzhen." She looked up, her eyes sharp. "You go to Shenzhen yourself?" "I do. My name is May," she said. "I worked in a garment factory there for 2 years. I know quality." A shadow passed over her face. "I had to come home. My father is sick." I hired her on the spot. May had an eye for detail and a no-nonsense attitude that balanced Lena's gregariousness perfectly. She could spot a flawed garment from across the room and knew how to alter it to perfection. With May managing the quality and inventory and Lena charming the customers, I was freed to focus on the bigger picture. Within a year I opened a second shop, this one in a more up-and-coming commercial district. I called it Horizon. It was larger, brighter, and I stocked it with more ambitious, expensive pieces. I was no longer just selling clothes. I was selling an idea, a glimpse of a modern, confident lifestyle. I hired 2 more girls, training them myself. I was becoming a businesswoman. The girl who had been cheated out of every penny, who had been told she was worthless, was now signing paychecks. The success was gratifying, but it was the quiet moments that truly marked my transformation. Sitting in my apartment with a cup of tea, listening to the rain. Walking through a park on my one day off, anonymous in the crowd. The simple, uncomplicated pleasure of deciding what to eat for dinner, with no one to answer to but myself. One evening, Lena and May convinced me to go with them to a new dance hall that had opened nearby. The place was loud, throbbing with music from Hong Kong, and filled with smoke and the energetic chaos of young people. I stood at the edge of the dance floor, feeling a world away from the subdued, controlled existence I had known as Thomas's wife. A man well-dressed and in his late 30s approached and asked me to dance. He was polite with a confident smile. For a moment the old Clara stirred, the one who saw any male attention as a potential threat, a prelude to betrayal. But I pushed her down. This was a new world. "I don't dance," I said with a small, polite smile. "But thank you." He accepted the refusal gracefully and moved on. The interaction was simple, harmless. but it was a milestone. I had interacted with a man on my own terms without fear or obligation. The chains of my past were truly loosening. My business dealings, however, were not always so smooth. The wholesale markets were a cutthroat world, dominated by men who were not used to dealing with a woman, especially a northern woman on her own. I learned to hold my ground, to negotiate with a steel in my voice that brooked no argument. My past had hardened me in a way these men could not comprehend. Their attempts to intimidate me were laughable compared to what I had survived. I began dealing with a supplier named Mr. Wong, a shrewd man with a network of factory contacts. He was initially condescending, trying to pawn off inferior goods at inflated prices. I refused, my tone leaving no room for debate. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Clara," he said one day, a new respect in his eyes as we finalized a large order of cotton blouses. "You are not like the other women here." "It's Mrs." I corrected him calmly. "And I am here to do business, not to be like anyone else." He nodded, and from that day on he gave me his best prices. Earning that respect was a victory that felt as significant as any financial gain. The seasons turned. One day while I was reviewing the accounts for both shops, a sense of profound accomplishment washed over me. The numbers on the page were more than just currency. They were a testament to my resilience. I had taken the ashes of my old life and built something solid, something beautiful. I thought of the baby I had chosen to lose. The sorrow was still there, a quiet, private ache, but it was no longer accompanied by guilt. That child had been a symbol of a life I was destined to escape. My legacy would not be a child born of betrayal, but these two thriving shops, the jobs I provided for Lena and May and the others, the independence I had carved out with my own two hands. I had wanted to see how Thomas and Evelyn would meet their end. Now I knew. And I had seen how my own story would continue. It would not be a dramatic tale of revenge, but a quiet, steady chronicle of building and growth. The past was a closed book. The future was a blank page, and for the first time, I was eager to fill it with a story of my own choosing. The woman who had been reborn from despair was finally, truly alive. 3 years. The passage of time was no longer marked by the slow, painful ticking of a clock in a silent house, but by the rapid, pulsing rhythm of growth and change. New Dawn Apparel and Horizon were now established names in their respective districts. We had a reputation for quality and style, a place where young women could find clothes that made them feel both modern and confident. My own life had settled into a comfortable, productive pattern. My days were a whirlwind of activity. Checking on both shops, negotiating with suppliers like Mr. Wong, who now treated me with a wary respect, and reviewing the ledgers that May kept with meticulous precision. Lena had become my de facto manager for New Dawn, her maternal warmth creating a loyal customer base that felt more like a community. One evening as I was locking up Horizon, a young woman in a smart tailored suit approached me. She introduced herself as Susan Lee, a writer for a new city lifestyle magazine called Shenzhen Pulse. "We're doing a feature on women entrepreneurs who are shaping the new commercial landscape," she said, her voice brisk and professional. "Your name came up several times. A northern woman who built 2 successful clothing stores from nothing? That's a story our readers would be interested in." My first instinct was a familiar one: to retreat, to hide behind a veil of anonymity. The scars of my past, of a reputation publicly shredded, ran deep. The thought of my name and picture in a magazine sent a jolt of primal fear through me. "Thank you," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "But I'm a private person. I prefer to let the shops speak for themselves." Susan Lee was persistent. "I understand. But your story could inspire other women. It shows what's possible now." She handed me a business card. "Think about it. It's not just about you. It's about the moment we're living in." I took the card, the thick, creamy paper feeling alien in my hand. That night in my apartment I stared at it. Inspire other women. The words echoed. The Clara of my past life had been inspired by no one. She had been crushed by the expectations of others. What if I could be something different? Not just a survivor but a symbol? It was a terrifying and strangely compelling thought. I discussed it with May and Lena the next day. Lena was immediately enthusiastic. "Oh, Clara, you should do it. It would be wonderful for business." May, ever pragmatic, looked thoughtful. "It is good publicity. But she is right. It will change things. People will know your face." That was the core of my fear. But as I looked around my bustling shop, at the capable women I employed, at the evidence of what I had built, the fear began to recede, replaced by a flicker of defiant pride. I had spent years hiding. Perhaps it was time to stop. I called Susan Lee. The interview was conducted in the back office of Horizon. Susan was sharp and insightful, her questions probing not just my business strategies, but my motivations. What drove you to start your own business, Clara? It's a rare path for a woman alone. I had prepared a sanitized version of my past, a young widow seeking a new start far from home. It was close enough to the truth to feel authentic, yet distant enough to protect me. I spoke of the opportunity one saw in the South, the desire for independence, the belief that women deserved clothing that made them feel powerful. When the article was published with a small, smiling photo of me standing in front of Horizon, I felt a mix of nausea and exhilaration. The piece was positive, painting me as a plucky, determined pioneer. The response was immediate. Customers came in specifically to see the woman from the magazine. Sales ticked upward. Other small business owners, women, approached me at the market, their eyes shining with admiration and a newfound sense of possibility. The attention was unnerving, but it also opened doors. A few weeks later, I was approached by a representative from a nascent department store, the Golden Phoenix, which was set to be the largest of its kind in the city. They wanted to stock a curated selection of our clothing. It was an opportunity for massive growth, but it also meant becoming a supplier, dealing with purchase orders and bulk manufacturing, a step away from the hands-on retail I knew and loved. It was a crossroads. The safe path was to continue as I was. The ambitious path was fraught with risk. I thought of Thomas, of his rigid adherence to a single safe path, the military. It had made him inflexible, unable to adapt when his world collapsed. I would not make that mistake. I negotiated the deal with the Golden Phoenix myself, with May by my side taking furious notes. We would start small with a dedicated corner for Horizon by Clara. I found a small, struggling local factory and invested a significant portion of my savings to help them retool to produce my designs. Simple, elegant separates based on our best-selling items. It was a gamble, but it was mine to make. The success of the department store line brought a new kind of pressure. The quiet anonymity I had cherished was gone. I was now a minor local figure. Men began to take notice not as potential dance partners but as suitors. A factory owner, a government official, even Mr. Wong, all made subtle overtures, seeing a successful, unattached woman as a prize. I politely, firmly turned them all down. The idea of merging my life, my hard-won empire, with a man held no appeal. The memory of being legally and financially bound to Thomas, of having my very existence contingent on his whims, was a scar that would never fully fade. My independence was my most treasured possession. One man, however, was different. His name was Daniel Young. He was an architect from Hong Kong in his early 40s, with a quiet intensity and eyes that held a hint of their own sorrow. He had come into Horizon to buy a gift for his sister and had been impressed by the store's aesthetic. He started coming in occasionally, always when it was quiet. We began to talk, not about business or courtship but about books, about the dizzying pace of change in the city, about the subtle differences in the light between Hong Kong and Guangzhou. He was the first man I didn't feel the need to guard myself against. There was no pressure, no expectation. He was simply interesting. He respected my boundaries, my business, my silence. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. One afternoon he found me in the park, sitting on my usual bench watching the children play. "May I join you?" he asked. I nodded. We sat in a comfortable silence for a few minutes. "You carry a great weight, Clara," he said softly, not looking at me. "I see it in your eyes sometimes when you think no one is looking. You've built this wonderful, vibrant life, but a part of you is still standing guard." His perception was unnerving. I said nothing. "I'm not asking you to put it down," he continued. "I just want you to know that I see it." It was the most intimate thing anyone had said to me in years. It wasn't a declaration of love or a proposition. It was an acknowledgement of my whole complicated self. The survivor and the entrepreneur, the wounded woman and the determined builder. I didn't know what to do with that. A part of me, the part that had been reborn from betrayal, screamed caution. But another part, a part one had thought long dead, stirred with a faint, fragile hope. The path ahead was no longer just about business growth. It was becoming about personal evolution, about the terrifying and exhilarating possibility of letting someone see the cracks in the fortress walls I had built so high. The currents of change were pulling me in a new direction, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to fight them. Daniel Leong did not press. He became a quiet, steady presence in my life, a friend. We would have dinner once a week, exploring the city's burgeoning restaurant scene. He taught me about architecture, pointing out the fascinating, often clumsy, marriage of traditional Lingnan style and brash new modernism in the city's skyline. I, in turn, taught him about fabric, about the subtle language of clothing. It was an exchange of worlds, a meeting of minds. I learned he had been married young in Hong Kong. His wife had died of a sudden illness years ago, and he had thrown himself into his work, moving to the mainland for a major project, seeking a different kind of life just as I had. We were two refugees from different kinds of grief, finding an unexpected solace in each other's company. Months passed. The Horizon Corner in the Golden Phoenix was a resounding success, and the factory I had invested in was now thriving, producing for my stores and a few other small retailers. My financial future, once a source of constant anxiety, was now secure. The fear of poverty, a ghost that had haunted me since my days with Thomas, finally loosened its grip. One Saturday, Daniel asked me to go with him to a nearby ancient water town, a place of cobbled streets and canals that felt suspended in time, a world away from the relentless modernity of the city. We walked along the quiet waterways, the only sounds the lapping of water and the distant songs of opera from a tea-house radio. We stopped on a stone bridge, watching a boatman pole his narrow craft beneath us. "I'm being asked to return to Hong Kong," Daniel said, his gaze fixed on the water. "The project here is finishing. They have a bigger one for me there." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I had known this day would come, but the reality of it was a physical blow. "I see," I said, my voice carefully even. "When do you leave?" "In a month." We stood in silence. The peace of the water town suddenly felt fragile. "Clara," he said, turning to face me. His expression was serious, open. "Come with me." The words hung in the air, simple and monumental. "To Hong Kong." I stammered, my mind reeling. "To Hong Kong. Not as my guest. Not as my anything unless you want to be. You have a business brain I admire. Hong Kong is a bigger stage. You could start a new horizon there. We could see what this is." He gestured between the two of us. "We could build something new. Together." Together. The word was both a promise and a threat. To build something with someone meant trust. It meant vulnerability. It meant the terrifying risk of handing another person the power to hurt you, the power I had sworn never to give anyone again. My life in Guangzhou was good. It was safe. It was successful. I had my shops, my apartment, my independence. It was everything I had fought for. To leave it felt like a betrayal of the woman who had clawed her way out of the ashes. But as I looked at Daniel, at the quiet certainty in his eyes, I realized that the woman I was now was not the same woman who had arrived here, trembling and alone. I was stronger. I had a proven ability to survive, to thrive. My independence wasn't a fragile thing that could be taken away by a change of location or a relationship. It was woven into the very fiber of my being. It was my choice to give, not someone's to take. Going to Hong Kong wouldn't be like following Thomas to a military base, my identity subsumed by his. This would be a partnership. A choice. I thought of Thomas and Evelyn, their relationship born of secrecy and betrayal, a twisted vine that choked everything around it until it destroyed itself. What Daniel was offering was the opposite. Something open, built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of loss. "I can't just abandon everything I've built here," I said slowly, my mind already racing, calculating. "You wouldn't be abandoning it," he said. "May is more than ready to run Horizon. Lena can manage New Dawn. You could be the owner, the director. You could come back and forth. This could be an expansion, not a retreat." He saw me. He saw the businesswoman, the creator, and he wasn't asking me to diminish her. He was challenging me to let her grow. I looked out at the timeless water, then back at the man beside me, who represented a future I had never dared to imagine. The future wasn't just about safety and solitude anymore. Perhaps it could also be about shared dreams. "I can't give you an answer now," I said finally. "I need to think. I need to talk to May and Lena." He nodded, a smile touching his eyes. That's all I ask. That you think about it. The journey back to the city was quiet, but the silence between us was no longer tense. It was full of potential. A week later I sat down with May and Lena. I laid out Daniel's proposal. To my surprise, they were not shocked. They had expected it. Clara, you have taught us everything, May said, her voice firm. I can run a horizon. It is time for you to fly higher. Lena squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening. You deserve happiness, dear. Real happiness. Not just a successful ledger. If this man is a part of that, you must go. Their faith in me, their willingness to take on the world I had built, was the final confirmation I needed. My legacy here was secure. It was time to build a new one. I met Daniel for dinner at our usual restaurant. All right, I said before he could even order tea. I'll come to Hong Kong. But on my terms. I will start a new company there. We will have separate homes. We will see what we build. The smile that spread across his face was brighter than any I had ever seen. Those are the only terms I would ever accept, Clara. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning and transition. Signing power of attorney over to May, packing up my apartment, applying for the necessary permits. There was fear, yes, a fluttering in my chest at the sheer scale of the unknown. But it was overshadowed by a thrilling, electric sense of anticipation. On the day of my departure, standing at the railway station with a new single suitcase, I felt a profound sense of peace. I was not running from anything this time. I was not a fugitive or a victim. I was a woman whole and complete, choosing her next adventure. I looked back at the city that had saved me, that had allowed me to become the person I was meant to be. I whispered a silent thank you. Then I turned and walked toward the train, toward Daniel, toward Hong Kong, toward the future. The past was finally, completely behind me. The shape of my happiness was no longer a defiant fortress, but an open door, and I was finally ready to walk through it. The end.